Tonight, Judge Roy Moore speaks out, fighting to hold on to his candidacy despite allegations of a sex scandal involving a 14-year-old girl.
This is a completely manufactured story meant to defrock this campaign.
But powerful Senate GOP fundraisers are already cutting ties anyway. If he doesn't step aside, will Senate Republicans say no more?
There is no need for a wall from sea to shining sea.
President Trump's Homeland Security nominee called an open borders zealot for those comments. Is that fair? We'll ask Arizona Congresswoman Martha McSally. And saving those who've served.
The person who's walking next to them on the street, looking a little bedraggled and perhaps asking for a direct handout, is actually a veteran.
We'll tell you what you can do to help this Veterans Day. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. Tonight, Judge Roy Moore is doubling down and denying reports of sexual misconduct going back decades. And amid widening calls from within his own party to step down, so far he's showing no signs of withdrawing from his bid to fill Alabama's open Senate seat.
This never happened. They know it never happened. There will be facts to show in this situation that this was a Democrat and maybe even the established Republican effort to undermine this campaign because they don't want to hear the truth in Washington.
But the GOP backlash does continue. The National Republican Senatorial Committee, the main fundraising arm for GOP senators and candidates, is withdrawing support for Moore. The Republican National Committee has not decided whether to sever its fundraising ties with him, though it's reportedly under consideration. And GOP senators are rescinding their endorsements also. So what options do Republicans have when it comes to Moore's name being on the ballot? And if he is elected, could his fellow senators block him from actually taking his seat? Fox News senior producer on Capitol Hill, Chad Pergram, joins us now for more. All right, Chad, good evening to you. What does the law, what does the Constitution say about what happens now?
Well, the state law says, they're past the window to pull him off the ballot. That's the problem. They already tried to move this special election once. That's going to be a problem because we're less than a month away here from the actual special election, December 12th. What we have here is a parliamentary option in the United States Senate. What they could try to do, if they really wanted to, is block him. Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution is clear that the Senate and the House, they are the final adjudicators of everyone who sits in those bodies. Now, we haven't had this come up in a while. After President Obama left the Senate, Roland Burris was appointed by the then governor of Illinois, Rod Blagojevich. He was under criminal charges at that time. He's still serving time in jail. And there was a question as to whether or not there was a taint on the appointment of Roland Burris to the Senate. And it came very close as to whether or not Democratic leadership in the Senate was going to seat Roland Burris. They ultimately did, and he served out the rest of President Obama's term in the Senate. The other option, also in Article 1, Section 5, is you could expel him. Now, they've not expelled anyone from the United States Senate since 1862. Jesse Bright, a senator from Indiana, in fact, they expelled 3 the same day, Confederate sympathizers. That takes 67 votes, and they've only expelled 14 senators in the history of the Republic. But so that's a far cry.
And that's all assuming that he gets elected. But my understanding is, as you said, without 76 days or notice or more, essentially his name's going to remain on the ballot. So if that is the case, if he somehow, voters have confidence he does get elected and they allow him to take the seat, what about this idea of them sort of shunning him? Even if he's a member, he's on the Hill, he's got the seat, maybe he doesn't have the same kind of access?
The only thing that you are guaranteed to do when you're in Congress is vote on the House and Senate floor. You're not guaranteed to have amendments, bills, sit on committees. They could keep him off committees. They could also not allow him to caucus, with the Republicans. That's not that old an idea. After Ted Stevens, the former senator from Alaska, was convicted, there was a question about whether they would kick him out of the Senate Republican Conference in 2008. At the same time, Joe Lieberman from Connecticut had switched from being a Democrat to what he called an independent Democrat. And they talked about throwing him out of the caucus because he spoke at the Republican convention. There's still one option here, too, Shannon. There's talk about maybe trying to engineer a write-in campaign. It's not that long ago, 2010, that Lisa Murkowski from Alaska won a write-in campaign to the U.S. Senate. In fact, there were classes for Murkowski supporters. That's not the easiest name to spell, to make sure that they were spelling her name correctly so it counted. And she, in fact, won election in 2010.
Yeah, and with that interesting spelling, I mean, that was a really difficult one. She pulled it off. So we'll see as this continues to play out, and plenty of opposition within the GOP itself. Chad Pergram, our expert on all things Capitol Hill. Thanks for making time for us tonight.
Anytime, Shannon.
Okay, in spite of the allegations, many of Moore's Alabama supporters are so far sticking with him.
If it was me, if somebody done me wrong, I would go ahead when the event took place. I would say something then. Why would I wait 30 years, or 10 years, whatever? But it's politics, a lot of it.
I believe this is Doug Jones. Some of his doings, I just don't believe Roy Moore did that.
Okay, but other potential voters out there are actually raising concerns. To discuss the choice now facing the good folks of Alabama, Fox News politics editor Chris Steyerwalt. Good evening to you, sir.
Howdy, ma'am.
Okay, so listen, December 12th, they go to the polls. They have these things to figure out. In the meantime, really the only people that matter in this conversation about whether he gets the seat or not are the voters.
Right, the voters and the reporters in Alabama. We're all now waiting to see, do other cases emerge? The Washington Post story seems quite credible in terms of the nature of the accusers. Very seldom do you see people put their names on it, put their picture in it, and go step forward. Now we want to know, are there other instances? Are there other people who are going to come forward? And also, how does this pass the smell test in Alabama? Roy Moore has a ardent core following among his diehard supporters from his terms on the state Supreme Court and from his time as a fixture in Alabama politics. Question is, will persuadable voters look at this and say, I think there's enough of a problem here that I'm going to shy away from this guy? And then the question becomes, Doug Jones, the Democrat that one voter mentioned, can he put himself forward as an acceptable alternative and say, look, it's only for 2 years. Basically, he wants to be the Scott Brown of the Democratic Party. Say, look, we're in the wrong state for me and I understand it, but it's 2 years. Try it, see if I do okay, and if you don't like it, you can throw me out in 2020.
Okay, so this was an interesting race in the primary because Steve Bannon was actually backing Judge Roy Moore. And tonight he was speaking about this issue, and we got that on camera. So here's what he said.
Is it just a coincidence that the Bezos, Amazon, Washington Post did the Billy Bush hit, and they did the hit on Judge Moore? Yeah, just a complete random thing in the universe. Look, like with Donald Trump, I said, when I stand with a man, I stand with him, right?
Listen, Chris, that second viewer or voter that you heard from there, she said, yeah, I think that this is just, I'm not sure. It seems like a hit piece kind of thing. It seems sketchy to me that it would come at this time. So it sounds like, some of these people, there was another voter who said it's actually a badge of honor to be attacked by something like the Washington Post. They're immediately skeptical.
Sure, but remember, this is the base of the base. Those are the core supporters. Now, as it turns out, in Alabama, there's a lot of those folks. It's one of the most Republican states in the country, and the Republicans there tend to be very conservative, and they like Roy Moore's brand of social conservatism first. And there's no question about that. But here's this. The Billy Bush tape was real. It wasn't fake. And it hurt Donald Trump. And actually, his ability to run a more humble campaign and a more calm and centered campaign after that tape came out, and they were trying to get the toothpaste back in the tube. He ran his best for the weeks after that. Moore's response today, when he was on Sean Hannity's radio show, and his responses did not demonstrate any desire to calm this down. Instead, it was he seemed to be whipping it up.
Well, and I got to tell you, I talked to somebody very close within the Roy Moore campaign today, and what they said to me essentially is they're working on some things that will cast some questions on some of these women. They're links to potentially the Democratic contender.
Oh, I've seen it.
And some other things. So we'll have to see. They say those things are coming. Bannon says that information is coming. We'll see if it's relevant and if it pans out. In the meantime, we do have folks who are withdrawing their endorsements, like Senator Lee, saying in a tweet, having read the detailed description of the incidents as well as the response from Judge Moore, this was yesterday, and his campaign, I can no longer endorse his candidacy for the U.S. Senate. How much do those kinds of things matter in Alabama?
They don't. They matter for the long term for the Republican Party. We're talking about two separate issues here. Who do Alabamians want to be representing the Yellowhammer State in the United States Senate? So I think that's one question. That'll be solved in December. Then the other question is for the rest of the Republican Party that looks at Roy Moore and says he will be an albatross around our necks because they're thinking about 2018. Mm-hmm. They're looking at states like Missouri where they'd like to pick up a seat. They're looking at states like West Virginia where they'd like to pick up a seat. They look around, they look at seats that they're going to have to defend. They don't want to have to be defending Roy Moore either for his statements about criminalizing same-sex relations or banning Muslims from serving in Congress, or now a personal scandal.
All right. Well, as it plays out, you'll continue to come back.
I know.
Give us updates.
2018 started early, and it's going to be a hot.
It's never over, is it? But we love to have a campaign to watch all the time. We do. All right, Chris Starwalt, happy Friday night.
Happy Friday.
Good to see you. All right, is there a media double standard when it comes to how political scandals are being covered? The Media Research Center says in the first 24 hours after the Judge Moore story broke, the 3 broadcast networks devoted gobs of coverage, some 24 minutes in those prime shows, to the story. Compare that to the months-long bribery trial of Democrat Bob Menendez, a sitting senator from New Jersey. Just 2 minutes of coverage. That's total. Dan Gaynor is vice president of the Media Research Center, the group that crunched those numbers. Dan, good to see you tonight.
Thank you. It's good to see you as well.
Okay, so there are some differences here, but the fact is we're talking about a sitting senator who is facing numerous criminal charges, potentially decades in jail. And it seems that there are crickets chirping when it comes to that. I mean, jury deliberations are ongoing right now, but it's hard to find any coverage of it.
Well, it's hard to find any coverage because one of the networks has not even covered it at all, and the others have just dabbled on it. And that's the problem. You've got this constant plan where the media will only cover scandals where the person has an R after their name. We see it for sex scandals as well. Anthony Weiner gets convicted, and they hide the fact that he's a Democrat. He gets sentenced, and the New York Times doesn't include the fact he's a Democrat in the story until they're called on it. We've seen this strategy for a long time, and ordinary viewers and ordinary voters see it as well.
Well, do you think that part of this is the salacious nature of these allegations against Judge Moore? Because, listen, you know what Senator Menendez is facing. I mean, they're bribery charges. They're things that don't have the same kind of ick factor. This is a hot topic right now with women coming forward and even men, too, talking about situations that they face where they've been harassed or victimized. Is it just that it's a hot topic, or is it about R versus D?
Well, given who brought up this topic, that's part of the problem. It's not just whether the women involved have credibility issues. It's the Washington Post having a credibility issue. Remember, you go back to 2011 and the bizarre Washington Post hit job on Rick Perry that there was a rock outside of this hunting lodge, a family-owned, that said something racist, and they did a massive story on it. Then 6 months later, they're doing the hit job on Mitt Romney. Here's a man who's in his 60s, and they go back 50 years to his high school time and complain he was gay bashing because he was pulling pranks on a classmate. So we've seen this strategy before from the Post, and that's, if you want to talk about anything, it's the Post credibility at issue, and media credibility nationwide is really in the dumps.
Well, we thought the study was very interesting, and meanwhile, we remain on jury watch, and we will keep folks updated as we eventually get to some kind of verdict in that Menendez trial, and of course, we'll continue to cover the Moore situation as well. Dan Gaynor with the Media Research Center, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, the headlines keep coming here at home. President Trump is rounding the corner in his tour across Asia. He's now in Vietnam, where he told a group of CEOs at the APEC summit if they're thinking about taking advantage of the United States, they better think twice.
I am always going to put America first, the same way that I expect all of you in this room to put your countries first.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is in Vietnam with more on what the president's up to and the latest White House reaction to the Moore allegations. Hello, John.
Shannon, good day to you from here in Da Nang, Vietnam, where we're 12 hours, let's put it ahead of you. So it's just after 11 o'clock in the morning here, and the president started his day about 2.5 hours ago, going to the APEC conference, greeting the president of Vietnam. He started his day today, though, without a meeting, a bilateral meeting at least, with President Vladimir Putin on the books, though we are told by the U.S. television pool that even though they didn't get a shot of it this morning, the president did briefly greet Vladimir Putin and shake hands with him. Last night, we actually got some video of the president and Vladimir Putin shaking hands. It was at the opening ceremonies, the so-called class photo. The president had, on his way from Hawaii to Japan, said that he was going to meet Vladimir Putin here in Da Nang, that he wanted to talk to him about North Korea and list more Russian support, also wanted to talk about Syria. But the White House never put the meeting together, which was awfully puzzling for the Russians, who had said that they were looking forward to meeting the president as well. Listen to what the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, said earlier today.
Ask the Americans, because we don't comment on this. We say that we heard the willingness of President Trump to meet President Putin, expressed by President Trump himself. I don't know what his other functionaries say. I am not responsible for that, so ask the American side.
While there was no bilateral meeting with President Putin scheduled for this APEC conference, the president did talk about North Korea to Putin and the other leaders together at a CEO summit yesterday, where he said that the nations of the Indo-Pacific region, the Pacific Rim, cannot afford to allow North Korea to turn back the progress that they have made in building their economy. So everyone needs to get together on the same page against Kim Jong-un. The president also had, as you pointed out at the top here, Shannon, very harsh words about trade, particularly for China and other countries which the United States has a trade deficit with. The president saying that the days of the United States being taken advantage of on trade are over. Listen to how he put it.
I do not blame China or any other country, of which there are many, for taking advantage of the United States on trade. If their representatives are able to get away with it, they are just doing their jobs.
And as the president focuses on trade in North Korea, he also has one eye on the Roy Moore scandal on the way from Beijing to Da Nang. The press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, with the official statement saying, quote, like most Americans, the president believes we cannot allow a mere allegation, in this case, one from many years ago, to destroy a person's life. However, the president also believes that if these allegations are true, Judge Moore will do the right thing and step aside. So it seems, Shannon, the White House is going to give Judge Moore a little bit of time at least to respond to these allegations. But if it turns out that they are true, I talked with a couple of folks at the White House today, they have no clue what to do. If Roy Moore does not step aside, if these allegations are true and continues to run and wins the seat, maybe there are some things that could happen. But in terms of putting forward a write-in candidate or anything like that, they don't believe that there's anything that could work at this point. So it looks like the White House's hands are tied over all of this. They just have to kind of watch it all play out. Shannon?
Yeah, it is awfully late in the game. All right, John Roberts live from Vietnam for us. Thank you so much. Coming up, Joe Biden may make another run for the White House. So is the Democrats' future strategy to rely on the past? We're going to debate that, as even top Democrats say it is time for some fresh faces. And now Rolling Stone's getting rocked by sexual harassment allegations. Editor Jan Wenner is reacting tonight. New details on that just ahead. Rolling Stone editor Jan Wenner is the latest entertainment heavy hitter to face allegations of sexual harassment. He's accused of offering freelance work in exchange for sex with a budding writer. Tonight, Wenner acknowledged he put the moves on the male writer, but he denies that any writing for sex exchange was ever offered. Democrats feeling more optimistic after sweeping wins Tuesday night are already looking towards the 2020 presidential election. Some familiar names to the party signaling they are not ruling out a run, including former Vice President Joe Biden.
I have a regret that I am not president because I think there's so much opportunity. I think America is so incredibly well positioned.
But is focusing on the faces of the past the best strategy for Democrats looking to the future? Fox News contributor and syndicated radio talk show host Leslie Marshall and Vince Colonnese, who is the editorial director for the Daily Caller, join us live. Good to see you both tonight.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, good to see you.
Leslie, I'll start with you. I mean, Joe Biden is well loved. He polls well across the board, across all kind of ideological lines, but he would be 77 if he runs again. Is that the future of the Democrat Party?
Well, what do they say? 70 is the new 35. No, I can't get on people for age. I mean, my mother actually became a VP when she was 57, didn't retire until last year, and she's 78. And sometimes people have that second win. The thing that I like about Joe Biden as a Democrat, and honestly was concerned about him running against Hillary last year, was that he really appeals to that working class, blue collar crowd, which quite frankly helped to put Trump over the top and win. I think Joe Biden is the only name out there right now that could defeat Donald Trump, regardless of his age. And even though we have some good names coming up on the horizon in the Democratic Party, I think that they're too new and too inexperienced to defeat Donald Trump and make him a one-term president.
Well, Vince, what does that say about the party? Because, you know, it was not that long ago that Nancy Pelosi was challenged within her own party and by the press saying, are you going to stick around forever? Yes. There was a run against her. And when it comes to leadership in the House, you've got Steny Hoyer, James Clyburn, Nancy Pelosi, all well into their 70s. And a lot of folks think, well, you know, they're trying to get things done in the House as Democrats. There are younger members, including Linda Sanchez. She's a Democrat out of California. And this is what she says about that. She says they're all of the same generation. And again, their contributions to the Congress and the caucus are substantial. But I think there comes a time when you need to pass that torch. And I think it's time. These are conversations that are coming from within the party, Vince.
That's right. And old white people leading the Democratic Party, that doesn't exactly work out for a party that's prioritized race over everything else, identity to politics over everything else. So they're often going to be looking for a young and diverse face. It's not going to be an old white person. In terms of the working class and identifying with the working class, that's obviously an important vulnerability of the Democratic Party. They've spent the last 6-7 months looking into all of this and assessing, wow, the reason we lost to Donald Trump is because we lost the working class. And the question is, like a guy like Joe Biden, if he's going to appeal to the working class, what about the rest of the leadership in the Democratic Party? It seems like the party's moved on from being concerned about that working class. They've moved too far into the identity politics realm. Transgender bathrooms, global warming, the average American's thinking, no, how do I get a job? How do I get back to work? How do I make more money? And the leaders of the Democratic Party are struggling to get back in that direction.
Well, listen, you know that the GOP likes to run against Nancy Pelosi. They think that they want her to stick around. In fact, the president tweeted this when she was talking about I'm not going anywhere. He said, I certainly hope the Democrats do not force Nancy P. out. That would be very bad for the Republican Party. And please let Crying Chuck stay. Leslie?
Well, you know, it's interesting that the president tweets this, because when he was talking about DACA and immigration and some other things, healthcare, he liked to sit down with Chuck and Nancy, crying or not. And quite frankly, although Nancy Pelosi, I would have said, needs to move on, she definitely has showed her leadership ability. So has Chuck Schumer, and with the president, as a matter of fact, in a better position than Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, and other Republicans in power on the right. I do feel there's a difference between who do we put forth as a candidate as Democrats and who do we look at within the party to have leadership. We do have diversity. We had a guy named Barack Obama, who was the first African-American president. And we also have other diverse people coming up, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Julian Castro, and more. But we have a candidate to put on that stage to defeat Donald Trump. I say you have to put the person forth that can do that. I would say my money is on Joe Biden. The VP can be younger and have not such a white guy inside the Beltway face, Vince, if you will. And then of course you can have people like Pelosi step aside, because clearly Linda Sanchez would like her position.
You would, Vince. Quick last word to you.
Well, I just think the Democratic bench is thin. I mean, if they're going to keep playing the old hits, it's just not going to work for them. And because this is a Democratic Party that not only has to struggle to get back into the White House, they're struggling in state legislatures and governorships across the country. 32 of those legislatures now controlled by Republicans, 34 controlled by Republicans in the governor's houses. That's a long way back for the Democratic Party. They can only go up from here.
Well, they did start that, they would say, on Tuesday night.
They did say that, yes.
So we will watch. All right, Vince and Leslie, good to see you both. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you, Shannon.
All right, coming up, an escalating crisis in the Middle East as allegations of terrorism and a potential new war are levied. Who are the key players, and what are the options there for turning down the tensions? A neighborhood spat or a political beatdown? That's the question surrounding the motive behind the assault on Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, a beating that left him seriously injured. Correspondent Doug McKelway went looking for answers right where it all went down.
Good evening, Shannon. We're reporting from Bowling Green tonight. The house you see over my right shoulder is the house belonging to Dr. Rene Boucher, the alleged attacker of Senator Rand Paul. He's not been seen there any time today, and his attorney told me he has fled this particular area after yesterday's arraignment because he doesn't want to unintentionally violate the restraining order which was imposed upon him. Here's more of what he had to tell me.
It has been reported that Senator Paul was blindsided.
I think that is an unfair characterization of how this transpired. That's not how I would describe it. That's not how it has been described to me.
Were they facing each other?
It's my understanding, yes.
And did Senator Paul strike blows with Mr. Boucher, Dr. Boucher?
Not that I'm aware of.
Meantime, a longtime neighbor of Paul who invited us into his house last night presents an entirely different picture.
Well, personally, I think it's a tremendously lame excuse for what took place that day.
In a statement from earlier this week, Paul's office absolutely derided the defense contention that this was stemming from a long-standing dispute. It said that the two men had not spoken for years and that the first time that Senator Paul spoke to his neighbor was after his ribs were broken. In the meantime, a public information officer for the Kentucky State Police tells me that the simple misdemeanor charges are likely going to be elevated later next week when they receive the official medical records from the hospital where Paul was treated to the Commonwealth State's attorneys, where they can actually examine the records indicating 6 broken ribs and profusion of fluid around Senator Paul's lungs. And lastly, we could also be looking at federal charges. The defense attorney told me that he has already been interviewed by U.S. Capitol Police and a field agent for the local office of the FBI. Shannon, that's it from Bowling Green. Back to you.
All right, our thanks to Doug McElway. Well, tensions are on the rise in the Middle East as the Saudi government tangles with Iran and Lebanon gets caught in the middle. As correspondent Rich Edson reports, leaders around the world are getting involved in an attempt to prevent yet another conflict in that region.
This was once a missile headed to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia's capital. The Saudi government also calls it an act of war by Iran. The Saudis say rebels in Yemen fired it. They intercepted it and claim it's the work of Iran. The United States military says the missile has Iranian markings.
That's been demonstrated, and there are pictures that depict that. So to me, that connects the dots to Iran in terms of who's supplying those missiles and that capability.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, while traveling in Asia, says the missile appears to have Iranian origin and, quote, once we can confirm that with some actual forensics, I think that will be useful in deciding what action to take next, particularly at the UN Security Council, because that would represent a violation of certain Security Council resolutions in terms of providing arms into a conflict zone. Saudi Arabia is fighting Iran-backed rebels in Yemen, part of a broader proxy fight with regional adversary Iran. In Lebanon, Saudi Arabia claims the influence of Iran-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon's government is overwhelming. The Saudis say Hezbollah's activities in Lebanon are effectively a Lebanese act of war against Saudi Arabia. The Saudis just requested their citizens leave Lebanon. This weekend, the Saudi-backed Prime Minister, Saeed Hariri, resigned, and he did so from Saudi Arabia and is still there.
Lebanon's Prime Minister is detained in Saudi Arabia, and it has to release him. The Lebanese should work to bring him back to Lebanon, and then it's up to him to go wherever. Maybe he wants to go back to Saudi. It's his call.
He also says Saudi Arabia has declared war against Lebanon and Hezbollah. Secretary Tillerson says the Saudi foreign minister assured him Hariri resigned on his own. Tillerson says he has no indication the Saudis are holding Hariri against his will. U.S. allies are also trying to halt the escalation. French President Emmanuel Macron flew to Riyadh to meet Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And there are internal challenges in Saudi Arabia as well, as Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is leading a controversial corruption crackdown that's led to the arrest of Saudi princes and top government officials. Secretary Tillerson says the crackdown seems well intended, though he says it does raise a few concerns. Shannon?
Rich Edson at the State Department. Thank you, Rich. Coming up, she's on track to become the Secretary of Homeland Security and now facing backlash for her stance on the president's pet project, the border wall. We'll get reaction from Arizona Congresswoman Martha McSally. The Justice Department reigniting its fight with Apple, this time over the Texas church shooter's iPhone. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein slamming Apple for its digital encryption a day after the company said nobody from the FBI had contacted it about the shooter's phone. The company says if the FBI had reached out within 48 hours of the shooting, they would have been able to use possibly Touch ID to access the phone. DOJ officials say that is not good enough and that there can be no privacy expectation for the phone of a dead man who gunned down 26 people. Well, Kirstjen Nielsen, President Trump's pick to succeed Secretary John Kelly at the Department of Homeland Security, testified at her Senate confirmation hearing this week, but the actual vote was postponed. The former DHS chief of staff is taking heat from immigration hawks who think she's too soft on the president's promise to build a border wall.
There is no need for a wall from sea to shining sea.
Joining me now, Arizona Congresswoman Martha McSally. And, that wall, of course, would run through Arizona. So we want to talk to her about that. She's also rumored to be considering a run to replace current Senator Jeff Flake, who says he's not going to run again. Congresswoman, welcome tonight.
Hey, Shannon, how are you?
Very good. Now, I want to ask you because Kirstjen Nielsen has taken some heat over what she said there, but I know that you too have said you don't think a physical wall is necessarily the answer. Does that make you soft on this immigration issue?
It's absolutely not what I've said, actually. I'm one of 9 members of Congress that represents a southern border district. And because of my leadership on border security, we've got transnational criminal organizations trafficking through my community. I now chair the Border and Maritime Security Subcommittee. As a freshman, I was given that leadership role. So we know all too well in Arizona what it's like to have these cartels coming through our communities with drugs and weapons and human trafficking, and we need a better strategy that absolutely includes a border wall and physical infrastructure where appropriate. That's what the president said. I agree with that, but we also need, in addition to that, more agents. We need the technology for fixed and mobile towers, sensors, airborne assets, manned and unmanned, and all the above intelligence-driven operations to stop these cartels and the impact that it's having in our communities. I've held multiple hearings on this issue, and I'm going to continue to lead on this issue to make sure that we secure our border and secure our communities in our country.
Okay, I want to play a little bit of an ad that comes from a group that's opposing you and give you a chance to answer some of the charges. Here's a little bit of what they have to say.
McSally voted twice to protect Barack Obama's unconstitutional amnesty program. Then she voted to fund the illegal Obama amnesty even after her colleagues tried to block it.
Okay, so your response?
That's just ridiculous. I haven't seen that ad. I'm just telling you, as someone who has been leading on these issues, just look at my record. I would invite any of my critics, and I would invite you to come down and visit us at the border. Look at my record of the things that I've done for border security and our public safety and security, and I'm going to continue to do that.
I love Arizona, by the way. It's a beautiful place to visit, especially during the wintertime. It's a great place to go down and visit.
Have you been to the border there, Shannon? You should really come. I'd love to host you.
Okay, I may take you up on that. We might take Fox News at night to the border. That would be fascinating because there are so many issues that are tied up in what's happening there. You mentioned many of them. Let me ask you about this issue about DACA and whether or not there's going to be some fix in the House. I know that you're part of the group that the Speaker appointed to try to come to some kind of solution. Again, it's one of those areas that when you talk about this, critics will say that it's about cooking up amnesty. So how do you respond?
Well, we are working through to find some consensus within the GOP on these issues. And look, we've got to address some of the root causes of why we're even in this situation. So that does include some very strong border security measures, other issues that are related to loopholes in our system that people are taking advantage of that continues to incentivize illegal activity. There's a lot of issues that we're talking about in this group. And right now we're continuing to work on it. But we've got to address them as we move forward. People are frustrated that the federal government is not doing what they asked related to securing our border, creating public safety related to criminal aliens that are in our communities and being let back out on the streets, other issues related to chain migration, other loopholes related to the trafficking, the unaccompanied minors, and asylum. There's a number of topics that many people within our conference are very concerned about, and we need to work together and with the White House and the President in order to address these issues because they're deeply important for all of us.
I know you're closely tracking the president's travels now through Asia. He's out there talking a lot about America first and protecting our country, saying to these other nations, we understand you've got to put your country first as well. Yeah. What do you make of this trip as he will soon wrap up in Vietnam and head on to the Philippines?
Well, this has been a crucial trip to a very important region, and his leadership has been vital. The speeches that he's made, specifically when he was in South Korea, North Korea being the threat that it is. I mean, I served in the military for 26 years. This is a very serious potential existential threat. And him saying, do not try us. We are going to be ready, willing, and able to stop you from being a nuclear power that is able to threaten America and our allies. And we have to show the strength in combination with the diplomacy and cranking up those sanctions in order to stop this from happening. And so that leadership in the region, stepping up the pressure on China, that's crucial in this North Korea element, and this threat was critical for him to send that message very strongly and make sure that everybody else knows that, hey, American citizens and American jobs are first.
All right, you know that there are plenty of rumors that you're going to run for the Senate seat that will open up for Jeff Flake, and announcing he's not going to run again. Anything you want to announce tonight?
Absolutely not, Shannon. Nothing's official.
All right, the speculation will continue. Congresswoman McSally, thank you very much for your time tonight. Good to see you.
Thanks, Shannon. We'll see you down at the border.
All right, I'm going to take you up on it. Sounds like a good
Great.
trip. We'll take the whole show on the road. All right,
yes, let's do it.
Coming up, Martha Analito is more than just the wife of a Supreme Court justice. She's a woman on a crusade to help homeless veterans. It's a Fox News at Night exclusive next. Martha Analito, wife of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, is using her experience growing up in a military family and her connections now to shine a light on veterans issues, including the tens of thousands who are living on the streets. She stopped by the studio to talk about the crisis as we head into Veterans Day weekend. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's a treat to have you with us.
Thank you, Shannon.
Tell me why this issue is so personal to you.
Well, I am an Air Force dependent. My father was a career Air Force veteran for 20 years, and that meant then there were times when he was not with me for a year at a time, 3 times during my childhood. But generally, because I understand the military, or I like to think I do understand what it takes to be a military veteran, to be a committed military employee, I just feel that I understand them and want to help as much as possible.
Yeah, and you do, because you've lived through this as a military family, a daughter. You know our veterans and all that they're facing when they actually leave the service. You do a lot of work with wounded warriors, and you also now are focusing on this issue of homeless veterans, which the numbers are actually pretty shocking.
But the numbers are frightening. 40,000 veterans are homeless on any given night. 1.4 million veterans are living below the poverty level. Another 1.4 are at the poverty level. And as a consequence, we want to make sure that there is not a single homeless veteran.
It feels like that's the least we can do for the way these men and women have served us. You're working with an organization that's very specific in their focus.
We are. It's called Operation Renewed Hope Foundation, founded by Lieutenant Colonel Deborah Snyder, who retired from being a helicopter pilot and saw homelessness abounding here in the metropolitan area. We're only a 5-year young foundation, and yet we've served and helped over 500 veterans and their families.
And you have some success stories, I know, because there are so many things that are involved. It's not just getting them a place to stay for the night. If you want to help people long term, it's about stabilizing their lives.
That's right. We first approached them in trying to get them into a stable living environment, whether that means they have a home or a rental. We try to get that under control. Once that is under control, then we start addressing the issues that go along with being homeless, whether they have financial stability, whether they have job training, whether they need to cross-train, and our group reaches out to make sure that all phases of their life, including their medications and their appointments to the hospital, as well as cross-training, come back into play. And we have social services that address some of the issues that are prevalent among veterans.
Do you think that the average American has any idea this is going on around them in their cities and their towns all over this country?
I would like to think that people are conscious. You know, the American people are very generous, and they are very, very considerate in thanking individuals when they see them in uniform. But oftentimes I think they overlook the fact that the person who's walking next to them on the street, looking a little bedraggled and perhaps asking for a direct handout, is actually a veteran. So I think our opportunity to raise awareness is most helpful here.
Tell me again about the organization if people want to help, because as you said, Americans are generous. We find that to be true with our viewers as well.
Well, it is called OperationRenewedHopeFoundation.org. You can give in-kind goods and services. We have a dentist who provides all kinds of free care for the veterans. You can be a sponsor, you can donate, and you can participate. We have at least one event a month for fundraising. Tomorrow night will be DC Dancing with the Stars, and its emphasis is on veterans participating.
Are you going to dance?
I am not.
Because I'll buy a ticket.
Thank you.
No, we love to support the work of this group, and we've seen it make real difference and a real change in people's lives. So thank you for lending your name and your celebrity to this very important issue as well.
Well, thank you, Shannon.
Great to have you. Coming up, it is night court and a victory for free speech and religious rights. Next. Time now for night court. We pass no judgment on these stories, but present them to you, the jury, for your consideration. The mayor of Austin, Texas, will not march in the city's Veterans Day parade because organizers are permitting some folks to march with the Confederate flag. The mayor said he wouldn't take part in the same parade with a symbol of racism. Instead, he'll write notes to veterans and volunteer at a food bank. Now to a campus free speech controversy. After a couple of Fresno State University students wrote some pro-life messages on a sidewalk, a professor who disagreed with those messages not only erased some of them, but also instructed other students to help him. Well, the pro-life students videotaped the incident and then complained to the university. Fresno State just levied a $17,000 fine on the professor and is making him undergo First Amendment training. As of this hour, there have been 585 homicides in Chicago this year, but Mayor Rahm Emanuel is proposing a crackdown on texting. The proposed legislation would assign Chicago police officers to monitor crosswalks for distracted walking. That could include texting and talking on a cell phone. Fines would range from $90 to $500. We continue to keep an eye on the president's travels through Asia, and we'll take you there live when those things happen. For now, we're the most watched, most trusted, and most grateful that you spent the evening with us. Good night from Washington. I'm Shannon Bream.